David, in your book, Best Team Ever, you talk about key elements that make teams thrive. What are the core ingredients that especially leaders in small and medium-sized companies should focus on first? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so in the book, we kind of look at and diagnose analyze about 40 years of great research on team culture, specifically team culture here, right? So not broader organizational culture, although in a small or medium-sized business, there's a lot of overlap between those two terms, right? Because there's essentially the team, right?
Yep.
And it is the whole company, or one or two teams, right? And we look at three fundamental elements, which are I call common understanding, psychological safety, and pro-social purpose. What I've found for a lot of smaller and medium-sized businesses, that common understanding piece is really the place to start, right?
Yeah.
And that's a mix of having a sense of both clarity and also empathy for your coworkers and understanding of their differences, right? So clarity is, the systems we have in place, the KPIs, the OKRs. A lot of times when you grow, right when you grow beyond the founder, there's this growing pain where you don't have the systems in place that you need.
Right.
And people aren't truly aware, even if you've got it going in your mind as the leader, as the top level of the organization, you might have clarity in your mind. People underneath you, not so much. They're still trying to figure it out.
Right.
But then also this sense of empathy or understanding of each other's differences, personality differences, work preference differences, strengths and weaknesses differences. We try, and a lot of times founders, especially as an organization is growing, they try and hire people that are very similar to them because they know they're already working well. Right? I did this job well. I grew this company to this size. So I want someone with similar characteristics to me. But the more you grow, the less likely it is that everybody on your team is going to think the same way, act the same way, be the same way. And the solution is not to try and turn them into you. The solution is to grow a better understanding of how those different perspectives and different strengths and weaknesses, et cetera, work into an overall team. So that sense of common or shared understanding is really where I encourage a lot of leaders in small and medium-sized businesses to start.
Yeah. I see that very often in, let's say, in large companies, that there are clear procedures, budgets. They have budgets for everything, for team building, etc. But if you look on a company with a startup company, or let's say 20, 30, 40 employees, where the owner is still the one to go, more or less. What do they need to do to build a strong team? They don't have an HR department or big resources. What would you say? How should they do that? How should the owner do that, especially if it gets to the common understanding, to the clarity?
Yeah, well, the good news is that I don't really think you need to spend that much money on team building budgets the way large corporations has. Controversial take, I know, but I think the majority of team building budget inside a large organization is wasted, right?
Yeah.
They waste it on experiences that feel good, but don't necessarily translate into a change in behaviors.
Right.
What I'm most interested in when I hear a phrase or use a phrase like team building is I'm interested in changing the habits, the norms of behavior, the way in which we operate. And you don't actually need a big budget to do that. You just need to be able to create a little guidance in discussing how we're going to work together, how each other like to work, and how we're going to work together. So I have an article on my site, very hyperbolically called The Single Greatest Team Building Activity. And it's completely free to run. It's what I call a manual of me activity. So the idea here is that you have each person on the team write up a manual of what it's like to work with me, right? What are my strengths and weaknesses and work preferences and what have you. I typically, when I work with a team, I'll use 4 starter questions that are all fill in the blank questions, or that they're all essentially, when are you at your best? You fill in the blank. When are you at your worst? So that is strengths and weaknesses, but also the context we work in, the types of jobs we work on. Where do you typically contribute to teams, and where do you need help? Right?
Okay. It's like a user manual, not for the PC, but for this person.
Exactly. Every time we bought an electronic device, we used to get that big, thick manual. Now, ironically enough, that comes on like a flash drive, or it is a download from the website, and nobody ever reads it. Right. It's the same, but it's the same idea, except this one you'll actually read, right? And so we give those questions out ahead of time. We have the team reflect on them, and then lead a discussion where people share their answers to that question. Now, here's what's really cool. That not only builds a deeper sense of me understanding you, but it also leads to a conversation about how the work gets done. Because what you inevitably
Yeah.
find is that somebody starts talking about the activities they're really good at, that they're really engaged in, etc. And then when they get to the worst, they talk about activities that are their worst, that are someone else's best. And so you could start to have a discussion about roles and responsibilities. And hey, maybe we need to change around some of these job descriptions. And that's something you usually can't do in a
Yeah.
large organization. That's
Yeah.
that's the beauty of doing this activity in a smaller or medium-sized operation, is that you can just change the roles. Hey, great, let's move this responsibility over
Yeah.
to you and you'll pick up this. And so you end up building common understanding on both sides through an activity like that. And it's totally free. Like I just gave you the questions. You can add more if you want. It
Yeah.
costs some time, but it doesn't cost any big licensing fee like a personality test. It's not taking everybody out on a hiking trip through the mountains with some time for reflection. Other than time, it's totally free.